Flicka. One of the most popular horses in fiction. Today, when you ask someone how they imagine Flicka, they usually come up with a black Mustang with a large spirit and a strong bond with a troubled teenager. This image of her is mainly thanks to the 2005 movie and its two straight-to-DVD sequels. But not everyone knows how far back the Flicka character goes. Flicka began as a novel written by Mary O Hara in 1941, titled My Friend Flicka, and only 2 years later, My Friend Flicka became a movie. By the end of the 40s, all three of the My Friend Flicka books would become movies. And that's what we'll be reviewing today, the original Flicka trilogy. And see if after the better part of a century, do these movies hold up? And of course, spoilers ahead. Right out of the gate, we get introduced to Goose Bar Ranch, where the McLaughlins live. Our main character being the son, Ken McLaughlin, played by Roddy McDowall, an actor who was every animal's best friend when he was a kid. In 1943, he got to both do My Friend Flicka, and later that year, Lassie Come Home. Lassie was definitely a better fit for him, with his British accent not being my first pick for the Wyoming countryside.
Mean I can have any colt on the ranch?
Yes?
A yearling?
He wants a horse of his own to raise so that he can prove to his stern father Rob that he is ready to handle more responsibility. Eventually, he is given the chance to pick any colt he wants. Oh yeah, small nitpick, even after they state Flicka is a filly, they still call her a colt.
Flicka. That's what I'll call her. My colt.
Your colt.
Genuine question, was colt ever a unisex term for a young horse, or did this film just forget horses 101? Eventually, the horse Ken picks is our titular equine, a chestnut Mustang named Flicka. Predictably, dear old dad doesn't like Ken's choice, because our whole family is quote-unquote loco. This is demonstrated quickly as Flicka's dam, Rocket, gets herself killed while being shipped to a new barn. And Flicka soon gets herself hurt. While we do get some cool horse riding scenes from the adults, Ken stays on the ground mostly, with the main bonding coming from domesticating the Mustang and getting her halter broke. In comparison to more ridiculous movies that show wild Mustangs being fully tamed and galloping around with their protagonist in no time, it's refreshing to see this approach. I also like the use of family bloodlines, especially in establishing why Flicka should be a harsh task, with brief mention of a legendary horse in her pedigree, known only as the albino, being the main reason. The last major hurdle comes when Flicka gets sick, and Rob is seriously considering putting her down, which of course breaks Ken's heart. But when it comes time to do the deed, Rob doesn't do it, and instead the two protect each other as they both have to stay alert for a cougar on the prowl. Flicka gets healthy again, and Ken has earned the approval of his father, while growing to be a more responsible owner. Everyone's happy, the end. And while that sounds brief, it's mainly because the film is super straightforward. Point A to point B is super clearly laid out, and it doesn't add a whole lot to the formula. It does everything a decent horse movie should, but also plants cliches that inferior horse movies would abuse, such as the young protagonist befriending a troubled horse, this being one of the first examples. It's harmless, with its major purpose being to establish our characters and lore that will be further expanded upon in the sequels, but it's ultimately forgettable. An adequate 6 out of 10. Admittedly, at this point, I wasn't super eager, because the other two movies are way less well known, but I persisted, hoping the sequel improved the original. Does it? Well, we're about to find out. The coincidences between Lassie and My Friend Flicka would not end with their first movies. In 1945, both movies would come out with sequels, focusing on the offspring of their title stars, Son of Lassie and Thunderhead, Son of Flicka. So, my gripes with the first film, as mentioned before, stemmed from not adding enough to its plot to make it stand out by today's standards. Thunderhead Son of Flicka fixes that issue, and then some. While both movies have the same skeleton, following Ken as he tames an untamable horse, it's far better executed this time around. Flicka only really appears in the beginning to show that she has given birth to an all-white horse named
Goblin. Okay, Goblin.
After getting the foal back home, Ken quickly expresses his wishes to turn Goblin into the best racehorse there is. If you're wondering if Flicka's Mustang heritage is going to throw a wrench into that, It's a movie, so this won't be a problem. The Black Stallion had a purebred Arabian beat thoroughbreds after all, so this is a small price to pay in my opinion, because the Mustang aspect of this movie is what makes it so cool. The Mustang heritage was already my favorite part of the first movie, so the fact it gets expanded upon so much is awesome. Mainly thanks to giving the albino a bigger role. Which, quick fun fact, true albinism does not exist in horses, so his name, while cool, is scientifically impossible, and he is instead either Perlino or Cremello. But neither name sounds nearly as powerful and mysterious, so it makes sense why they named him this way. Back to the movie, the albino was only mentioned the first time around, but this time, he plays a vital role as the antagonist. We get introduced in a flashback that establishes his mythos. A white, blue-eyed horse who steals the best mares from the herd and kills any stallion who gets in his way. He appears throughout, usually hurting horses or killing a rival, but becomes way more important later. For now, we watch Ken as he has a more explosive time trying to tame Goblin compared to Flicka. But eventually, they get him to the racetrack where he is renamed to Thunderhead. Now at this point, I predicted that Thunderhead was gonna miss the break and then pass everybody. And he does for the first part, in a pretty well done horse racing scene. I know I brought up the Black Stallion before, but both of these movies do feature wild racehorses recovering from poor starts to chase after their competition. Although in Thunderhead, a major difference is made. Right before the finish, Thunderhead stops, bolts, and throws Ken off, bowing his tendon and ending his racing career. Some might find this disappointing, but I actually like this change of pace, especially since it gives space for the last 20 minutes. Now this final act is definitely the darkest the My Friend Flicka series ever gets, as the albino ends up mortally wounding the McLaughlin's lead stallion Banner, a minor character that appeared in both movies, forcing Rob to end the horse's suffering with a shotgun blast to the head. Even with it being shown off screen, it's a pretty unflinching scene that really caught me off guard. After this, as everyone camps for the night, Thunderhead breaks free, and Ken has to pursue him on foot. The chase leads to him finding the albino's hiding spot, where he and all the mares he's stolen have lived in solitude. But of course, the albino hates outsiders, and goes to kill Ken, and then boom, Thunderhead comes to the rescue, leading to a final battle between the two horses. The fight holds up decently well, with a lot of long takes of wild horses running after each other with ears pinned back as they go tooth and nail. But Father Time is undefeated, and even the albino can't stay on top forever, being killed by his own grandson, the same way he had to many other stallions before. In my limited experience watching horse movies, this is the first time I've seen one have a full-fledged equine villain. And not just that, one with a kill count. In comparison to so many other horse movies that have one-dimensional, cardboard cutouts for bad guys, this is super refreshing. And even though the movie celebrates his death as a classic villain defeat, with Ken praising Thunderhead for saving him and killing the albino, I ended up feeling sympathetic towards him, because he ultimately is just a horse doing what any wild stallion is meant to do. The film ends on a pretty nice note, with Thunderhead becoming the new lead stallion, forcing Ken to set him free with his giant brood of mares. Releasing your horse at the end of the movie can be considered a cliche, but it stays comparatively fresh with the fact that Thunderhead achieved this through murder. It's a darker, way more action-packed movie in comparison to its overly streamlined first installment, and is an objectively good sequel, by taking things already established in the first film and expanding on them in great, meaningful ways. Greengrass of Wyoming is gonna have a hard time topping this, but I can't make any final judgments just yet. For now, Thunderhead Son of Flicka gets a 7.5 out of 10. So this film is easily the least well-known of the three. For one, the title Greengrass of Wyoming doesn't really have an obvious connection in comparison to the first two, and the original cast that we've watched so far does not return for this one. While I do not like this in terms of the adult McLaughlins, I don't mind the recasting of Ken, because this is the first movie where he is depicted as an adult. Instead of thoroughbred racing, this time we switch over to harness and get introduced to the neighbors, the Greenways. We have Grandfather Beaver, yes, that is his name, a former champion standardbred driver turned alcoholic slob, who needs to be taken care of by his only remaining family, his granddaughter Carrie. He does care for Carrie, but his addiction makes him unable to take care of himself and deliver on the promises he makes, such as finally getting back to working on his only remaining horse, Sundown. When the two are at their primes, they won many great races together, but Sundown is an older horse, and Beaver is in no condition to work him. The big shift this time around is the idea of romance. While it's never full-fledged, Carrie does like Ken, and for a little bit there's some Romeo and Juliet thing going on with Beaver not wanting Carrie to see Ken. But it doesn't amount to a whole lot and gets dropped. Instead, we focus on equine romance, as we get introduced to our third horse, Crown Jewel. She is a standardbred who Ken buys without his parents knowing, so his father Rob is especially uneasy of her and Ken's decision. This plot trope is definitely starting to wear a bit thin, considering this is the third time this has happened. How many more times can you doubt your own son? What a great father! To make matters worse, Thunderhead has taken the place of the albino as a mare stealer and a pest, so now people want to shoot him. This comes to a head when Thunderhead and Crown Jewel fall in love, causing Crown Jewel to escape her enclosure. While everyone else would rather just kill the white stallion, Ken, being Ken, defies orders and re-domesticates his troubled white steed. This is the first drastic change that I have a major problem with. In comparison to Son of Flicka, which builds off everything its predecessor had already made for it, this film regresses by actively undoing the ending of Thunderhead Son of Flicka. So much for releasing him into the wild. Also, despite being a horse who steals mares, for some reason this one mare makes him willing to change and become a tame horse again. Also, the question of who is going to lead the wild herd is left completely unanswered. It's a bit disappointing considering how well the first two work together in building each other up into a great two-movie storyline. But although Greengrass of Wyoming makes some questionable choices, there is still merit to be had with this threequel. Adult Ken is my favorite version of the character, and it's great to see him go from a young boy to a man over the course of the trilogy. It's a very satisfying progression, and I'm glad we got to see him fully grow up. Another improvement comes in the racing. Standardbred harness racing differs in comparison to thoroughbred horse racing by having some of its races be contested in heats, where horses race up to 3 times in a day in a sort of tournament style. Whoever wins 2 heats wins the whole race. This is where Beaver really starts coming in, as he has slowly changed from a drunk to someone ready to finally make a comeback for himself, his horse, and especially his granddaughter. It is sweet, but could have been a lot more impactful. I did enjoy his horse Sundown being an old veteran coming back to do what he does best, but he doesn't appear nearly enough. It would have been really cool to have more scenes with Beaver and Sundown, showing the two old warriors building themselves back up and proving they still have what it takes. It's a missed opportunity that really irks me because I would love to see a movie really delve into this. The 3-race style is fun, but it's also snubbed of its full potential because both times Crown Jewel loses, she breaks stride in the exact same way, leading the pack and then suddenly galloping. It comes off rather lazy and squelches some of the momentum the final race had going for it. It wouldn't have taken much to just have the third race be done a little differently. Maybe a head-to-head duel where Sundown prevails without the need of breaking stride the same way she did in round 1. Just something else. But at least they make the right horse win, with Beaver and Sundown back in the winner's circle, which was nice to see. And the racing scenes are still well filmed, they just break stride in the final quarter. It can definitely be considered the oddball of the 3. It adds cool and interesting elements, helping stand on its own, and the new characters are fun additions. Adult Ken is best Ken, and the standardbred racing is well filmed. But it fails to deliver on these new concepts to their fullest potential, and in some areas backfires. It's a good final installment, and I would still watch it before I watch the first My Friend Flicka movie, and it does deserve more attention, but it's also the most flawed of the Flicka trilogy. 6.5 out of 10. So that was the My Friend Flicka series. 3 movies about a young man dealing with crazy horses executed in slightly different ways, with some working better than others. The first being the simplest, the second one being the most exhilarating, and the third being the most experimental. It's not a perfect trilogy, but with plenty to offer for any horse enthusiast. I recommend giving these a watch. They're all 90 minutes or shorter, so they're easy to sit through. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and tell me what horse movies you'd like to see me review. More than likely, I'll have to review the modern Flicka trilogy down the road, which I have a sneaking suspicion won't be as good. See you guys next time!